Welcome to another episode of the Travis on Sports podcast. A little late with this one this week because it took a little longer editing the last one, even though it was a shorter episode last week. It's Wednesday, April 6th, 2022. And today we're talking about the latest from the MLB and previewing opening day. We'll recap the Final Four national championships in college basketball, as well as some other news around the college basketball world, some other college sports stuff in general as well. And then we'll have the latest from the NFL and the playoff pictures in the NBA and NHL as those tournaments are rapidly approaching. So we begin today in baseball. Opening day is officially upon us. Tomorrow, most teams will start. Other teams will wait until Friday. But this weekend, we have baseball yet again, even after all that lockout drama and everything this year. Thursday's Yankees-Red Sox game and Twins-Mariners games have already been postponed and will be made up on Friday. But here are a few things that I'm watching this season. You've got a lot of rookies to watch this year, according to MLB.com's top 100 list. Top 100 prospect list, that is. 10 of the top 100 prospects in baseball have made initial 28-man rosters, and that is not including injured players like Baltimore's Adley Rutschman and Detroit's Riley Green, who both likely made the team outside of their injuries. The highlights of the healthy guys are Detroit first baseman Spencer Torkelson, the number one overall prospect in Kansas City's Bobby Witt Jr., Cincinnati pitcher and position player Hunter Green, another former first-round pick. Also making their debuts, you have C.J. Abrams, who was a top pick for the San Diego Padres, Reed Detmers, a pitcher for the Dodgers, catcher Joey Bart for San Francisco Giants, pitcher Nick Lodolo for Cincinnati, infielder Bryson Stott for the Philadelphia Phillies, Josh Lowe for Tampa Bay, and pitcher Joe Ryan for Minnesota, all in the majors to start the year. To go along with that, there are quite a few teams that have very much improved their rosters, their lineups, and their rotation. So I'm going to go through a couple now that stand out to me. The Tigers added Tucker Barnhart, decent bat, really good at working with pitching staffs, and that's what they need there with a mostly young rotation with Mize and Skubal and Manning and even Turnbull when he returns from his surgery, or Alexander, who's the temporary fifth starter while everybody else works in there. Green and Torkelson obviously add a lot to that lineup, but the big thing was just a couple days ago, the trade for Austin Meadows at a huge middle-of-the-order, former all-star bat, knocked in 106 runs last year. Now his average has gone down the past few years, but he's still a very powerful bat in the middle of the lineup and under team control on his current contract for another 3 years. And so he improves the middle of the order there and improves the outfield drastically. The Phillies have crazy power. It's a crazy good lineup. You could possibly have 8 really good bats, at least 7 above average bats, and a prospect trying to figure things out a little bit. You have the established guys, Bryce Harper, JT Realmuto, Nick Castellanos, Rhys Hoskins, Kyle Schwarber. You also have Didi Gregorius, who has had great years in the past. Gene Segura, who has also had great years in the past. Then Alec Baum, possibly playing third base, maybe even in a platoon situation, but trying to figure things out. Those would be the 8 guys. The Blue Jays, a lot of people have them as a World Series possibility. They have a really good lineup. I mean, basically last year's lineup, and you just add Matt Chapman in at third base, and that's an improvement at third base there. And they have pretty good pitching as well this year. The Red Sox can be really dangerous, at least their 2 through 6 spots in their batting order. Rafael Devers, Xander Bogaerts, JD Martinez, Alex Verdugo, and then adding Trevor Story, who had an incredible run as a shortstop in Colorado, is now taking over as the second baseman for the Red Sox. The only thing that bothers me is their rotation. I know Nate Eovaldi had a pretty good year last year, but he's not a number one guy, and right now he's the number one guy in that rotation. They need to find improvements there big time. The Yankees, you already knew they had a lineup full of power with Judge and Stanton, Rizzo, Gallo, LeMahieu. Now they add Josh Donaldson, former MVP, deals with some health issues sometimes, not the same player he was in that MVP year, I don't think, but he's still got plenty of power and okay average and can hit anywhere from 1 through 6 in that lineup. And their entire lineup, 1 through 7, is all dangerous. And they have a better rotation than Boston right now. The White Sox, they had a pretty good lineup last year, especially when Luis Robert and Eloy Jimenez were healthy. Those guys are both healthy to start this year, as far as I know, and they traded for outfielder A.J. Pollock, who's been a very productive and successful outfielder with the Diamondbacks and the Dodgers, to strengthen the bottom of that batting order. The Mariners, I don't really know what to make of them this year, but they did do one thing right, and that was add protection around Mitch Haniger, who was their best hitter the past few years, adding a couple former Reds, Eugenio Suarez, who average has gone down, but has always been powerful bat, hit over 50 homers a couple years ago, and Jesse Winker, who was basically the odd man out in the outfield situation with the Reds. Probably could have been a DH for them. He's going to be the DH for Seattle this year. It's just a guy with a ton of power in his bat as well. The Braves lose Freddie Freeman to the Dodgers. We'll get to the Dodgers in a minute. But they also trade for Matt Olson, who might not have the same average, but just as much power in his bat to play that first baseman spot. And they'll also get a big return from Marcell Ozuna, who was suspended for that domestic violence accusation and allegations last year. Those allegations were found to be false, and he's allowed to be playing. And they're going to be starting the year without Ronald Acuna, but once he comes back, it's going to be a very dangerous lineup with Olson, Ozuna, Ozzie Albies, Ronald Acuna, and Austin Riley, and who knows who else could step up there. Travis d'Arnaud is still a pretty good catcher. Dansby Swanson's a pretty good bat as well. The Marlins, again, this is highlighting improvements and stuff, not necessarily great lineups. The Marlins did make an effort to shore up their lineup a little bit with some power with Jorge Soler and Avisail Garcia. Those guys can hit pretty much anywhere from 2 to 6 in the lineup. The rest of the lineup's a little light. Jesus Aguilar had a pretty good year last year, but he's a little hit and miss early in his career. Jesus Sanchez and Garrett Cooper, still waiting on those guys to completely figure it out. They're decent options to have there, especially for a team that's not really expected to go anywhere this year. The Mets have a very, very strong lineup. All 9 hitters have some pop, and it's a really good mix of power and ability. They add Starling Marte, who not only has power ability and batting average ability, but he steals a ton of bases. Eduardo Escobar is added in there. He's a big-time power hitter. And Mark Canha, underrated power hitting 7th or 8th hole hitter as an outfielder to go along with guys like Lindor and Alonso and Nemo and whoever else I'm forgetting right now. Then the Brewers, they need Yelich to have a bounce-back year. He was not good last year. They add Andrew McCutchen, Hunter Renfroe, and Rowdy Tellez in the middle of the lineup. And now you look at their lineup, Willy Adames takes over at the top of the order in either the 1 or 2 spot. And now you have Lorenzo Cain, who we all seen what he is at his best. He's not in his prime anymore, obviously, but he is the 8th hitter of that lineup, if that tells you anything about how much better that's gotten. Plus, with Corbin Burns and Brandon Woodruff, they have a really good 1-2 punch in that starting rotation. Cardinals bring back Albert Pujols. It's not the same player at this point, but it's a really strong presence in the middle of the lineup, and he's going to reach 700 home runs this year, or come pretty damn close to it. And it's good to have a guy like that around in the lineup, mentoring. I mean, obviously, Nolan Arenado and Paul Goldschmidt have already figured it out, but you got younger guys like Tyler O'Neill and Daniel Carlson who just started to figure things out last year. He's going to be a really good addition there and a good presence around those guys. The Dodgers might still have the best lineup. They had a great lineup last year that you could say was possibly the best, and they added Freddie Freeman from the Braves, who you could conceivably argue was the best offensive first baseman in the game. Pitching still great with Julio Urias and Clayton Kershaw and Walker Buehler. I just don't love their 5th starter. Their 4th starter is Tony Gonsolin. That could go either way. Andrew Heaney is their 5th starter, and last year his ERA was over 5, so I would not be comfortable there. And lastly, the Padres, basically the same lineup last year, promising year from Cronenworth, Will Myers, Hosmer, Machado, Tatis. And then the National League now has the DH. They found a perfect candidate for that, and Luke Voit, who is splitting time as a power bat off the bench or at the first baseman for the Yankees. There are also a few rule changes this year. Haven't been a fan of the rule changes that baseball's made recently, but these two are pretty good changes. They're at least the ones that I'm about to cover are pretty good changes. For one, we now have the universal DH, so the National League and American League will now have designated hitters. No more pitchers hitting, just 9 professional hitters for all 30 teams. I think that's more competitively balanced, more fair, and it really stands to benefit National League teams who have stacked up on surplus power bats on the bench, or have an extra infielder or the fourth outfielder who's just more of a home run hitter than anything else and can be a little bit of a defensive liability. It allows them to put them into the lineup without really having any negative effect on the game. The MLB is also allowing teams to have up to 5 players wear this new device called the PitchCom, which is intended to prevent sign stealing by allowing players to discreetly communicate with each other while in the field, changing the signs. Anytime you can do that discreetly without the other team noticing would help. And then broadcasting-wise, they've also added some deals. There are now Tuesday night games nationally on TBS. There's YouTube TV game. There's Peacock games. There's quite a few of those around there. And then we got some of the latest signings and trades before opening day. Obviously, we talked about Tigers landing Austin Meadows. Riley Green, their top outfield prospect, broke his foot. Otherwise, he would have made the team. But now he's no longer going to be available for the opener on Friday. The rumors spread quickly that the Tigers wanted to add someone there. A lot of the reports mentioned the Rockies and D-backs because they had a surplus of outfielders with guys like Pavin Smith or Garrett Hampson, which would have been fine, cheap, affordable, young depth players. I don't think any of those guys would have ended up being permanent, everyday, locked into the lineup kind of guys. And that's what the Tigers ended up getting. They got a guy that's going to be in the middle of the lineup for at least the next 3 years in Austin Meadows, is a true power hitter, former All-Star, true middle-of-the-order bat. And all it took them was a draft pick and infield prospect, Isaac Paredes. Paredes, highly regarded Tiger prospect, great power bat, came up as a shortstop, might fit better at third base or second base or even as a DH. And that's what made him expendable, was he's a good enough prospect to help another team, but in Detroit there was a logjam at the positions he played with all the guys in front of him, and that kind of limited his playing time at the big league level when he was probably ready to be past AAA, and stalled his development a little bit. It's hard to see a downside on this deal for the Tigers. I mean, if that offer is on the table and you're going to get a player of that caliber, you absolutely have to take it. Paredes, I really like him as a player, and I hope things work out for him down in Tampa. Should give him a chance to crack the lineup and carve out an everyday role, or at least a key bench role down there. There just wasn't a lot of room now that all these prospects and signings and acquisitions and everything are making their way to Detroit. On the Tampa side, it's a little puzzling because you trade this young perennial all-star for such a small package, such an unknown. I think Paredes is going to be pretty good, and sure, things could work out great, especially with the way Tampa develops their talent. It's just they gave up such a good player for such little return. There have been 4 MLB players suspended for 80 games over positive drug tests already. Outfielder and first baseman Danny Santana, pitcher Richard Rodriguez, and infielder Jose Rondon are all free agents who were suspended, and Milwaukee backup catcher Pedro Severino was suspended. White Sox shortstop Tim Anderson has also been suspended for the first 2 games this year as a carryover from a 3-game suspension that was handed out last September for contacting an umpire during a benches clearing situation, ironically in a game against the Tigers, who they will be playing this weekend and who he will be missing the first 2 games against. There will also be a new face covering the World Series on Fox. John Smoltz will stay in his role, but as we know, Joe Buck has moved on to cover Monday Night Football for ESPN, and he will be replaced by Joe Davis, who's a 34-year-old, been working with the network, called college football games, basketball games, may have also called some NFL games in the past. And another interesting note here is both Davis and Smoltz, who will be calling the World Series together, are from the mid-Michigan area. To college basketball, and a busy, busy weekend. I will put this out there and admit I couldn't see the Final Four games on Saturday because I was at a wedding, but I'll say what I can gather from everything I've heard.